Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. Today's topic is debugging, and the cool stuff you see on the screen in the background is what you will be able to do if you stick with this class till the end. So let's get started talking about debugging. Now I'm going to show you how to use the debugger in Pycharm. If you're using another IDE, it will be very similar to this. The first thing to know is that when you see icons like this that you can click, then this typically means run, and this typically means, as you can see, it's a little bug, it means debug. If you want to run the debugger, let's say from here, then you can click on this and it will run whatever is in this drop down. Now that may or may not be the program that you're looking at here. So you can right click, and again you can see run my program or debug my program, so that allows me to run it or debug it. And I can do the same thing over here. I right click over here and it says I can do run or debug. So that's the way that I initiate the debugger. If I'm going to debug, then if I don't set a breakpoint, then it will just run to completion. So what you need to do is set a breakpoint. Typically you will set it in this gutter here. They call this a gutter area. And if you click on a particular line, then it will put something like a red dot there, a red circle, and that will be where I'm going to debug. To undo it, you just click on it again. If you click on something that's not a line of code, like a comment or something else, then it doesn't work, so you want to make sure you do that. Now when I run the debugger here, what's going to happen is it's going to run, and when it gets to that line, it's going to stop. And at that point, I can observe what's going on. So here you see it has stopped. I know that it stopped because over here my debugger popped up and it shows that I can resume my program, I can quit my program, or I can step through my program. And these are the options that I have for stepping through it. Over here, I can look at the console. That's what it has printed out. I can also look at variables. At this point, I really haven't defined any variables. I am going to go one step, and this is how I'd say step over. It's probably poorly named. Step over means basically execute this line and then stop at the next line. I'm going to click on this. Now create devices normally happens almost instantaneously. When running in the debugger, Pycharm has a lot more work to do, and since I'm creating 64,000 devices, then it's going to be busy running a bunch of stuff in the background. But I've blabbed on long enough. You can see that it stopped again. I can see that because it highlights the line that it is stopped at. And again, I can see that I can do something here. I don't know if you noticed, but go back and look at when I ran create devices, when I did this step over, this got grayed out and I was unable to continue because it was in the middle of running stuff. Now I've run create devices, and now I have a variable called devices. Guess what? It showed up down here in my list of variables. I can click this little greater than sign or right arrow or whatever you want to call it, and I'm getting a hint that there's a bunch of stuff in there. I could click view, but what I'm going to do instead, it's going to format things for me. Look at this. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I wish I could show you all of it, but there's actually 64,000 of these things that it has created. And you can, up there we go, 64,416 more items. I could double click to see it. I don't want to do that. I have no idea how long that would take. But for every one of these things, guess what? Create devices gave me a list of devices. I can look at my devices. How cool is that? I'm looking at this item here. The name is R10UH. I can see the vendor, the OS, the version, the IP address. That's the first IP address that I assigned for all of my devices. So we see that's really cool. Let me make this small again. Now what I want to do is get to the important part of my application. This application is comparing lists versus dictionaries. So what I want to do is I want to actually, before I go and get this stuff, I want to see what am I doing right here. So right here, I am actually going to be creating a dictionary that points at these same items. If you're curious about this application, you can look at it in 52 weeks of Python, in the previous lesson, whatever week this is, or in the 10-minute version. This is the 10-minute version of debugger. Just look at the previous one and you'll see my description of what's going on. But I'm going to step through it. So now that went pretty quick. Now I'm at the for loop right here, and I've got devices open there. I'm going to close that. So what I'm going to do now is, you ever wonder what happens in a for loop? I've been telling you that when it goes through the for loop, that the first time through, that it's going to set this variable called device equal to the first item in devices. So let's see if that's actually true. So look at this. It's actually put it up here for me. How cool is that? It showed me device, and it's giving me all of these values. If I were to look down here in variables, I could open up device. Remember, this is my one device, and it actually is the first item in that list. It's the same stuff that we just looked at. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to click down here, and I've printed it. If I want to look on the console, I can see, oh yeah, sure enough, I printed it. So that makes sense. My print statement worked the way that I thought that it should. Now let's go to this next thing, and we can actually visually see a for loop in action. So now my for loop, I'm back up here at the top. Remember, my device is still the previous value because I haven't gone into the next iteration. If I click forward, the next iteration, look at my name is different. Probably the best thing to look at is my device IP address, 10.0.1.2. You can see that right here as well if I was to open it up. Oh, and by the way, guess what? This just turned blue. It's indicated it has changed since the last line of code. And here's my name and my IP address and all that other stuff. So now I can go down here, and I can begin to see as I go through this. I'm going to let this happen one more time. Guess what? I've been doing something. I've been creating this devices dictionary. Let us take a look at my devices dictionary. I've added 3 items in it. What's my key? Remember, my key is going to be the device IP address, and there it is, 10.0.1.1. Next one is 10.0.1.2. So it's showing me all of my different device dictionary items. And when I was done with this, I would have 64,000 of these. And if we want to have a look at what it's actually doing, it's actually incrementally creating all of these dictionary items. And I show you when we're looking, if you go back to the previous lesson, you can see that it's actually pointing to this same dictionary. This item right here is actually pointing the same piece of data that is in my list of devices down here. So that is what in a nutshell, what my cool debugging capabilities are. Now, not only can I look at this as I go through it, but let me show you one more thing. I'm going to stop this. Now, let's say I wanted to do this again. Another place I can run this from is in my debug window. So I'm just going to say rerun this thing, and it's going to stop right here. Now, what if I wanted to see what was going on in create devices? Well, if you've been following along with me in Pycharm, you know I can do Control B, and it'll open up my window, so I could actually set a breakpoint right here. But what if I didn't want to do that? One thing that I could do is I could say, hey, I want you to step into this function, and watch what happens when I do that. It took me directly to the line in this code. Now, if I wanted to step out of it, I don't want to look at it, I could do that. There are other options that I'm not going to go through, but I could actually step through my create devices code right here where I am, and I could see what happens when I go through this. Here I have a for loop inside a for loop, and that might be kind of interesting for me to look at. Anyway, really cool stuff you can do in a debugger. So let's review what we learned. We learned the various ways that you can start the debugger going in Pycharm. We learned about setting breakpoints in Pycharm. We learned about stepping through the code in Pycharm. And we learned about examining the data to see what's inside. Hopefully that made sense. If not, let me know. Remember, you can always look at the long form version of this in 52 Weeks of Python. And thanks for listening.